Howdy folks, Tom Bowlus with Bass Gear Magazine here. And today we're shooting a companion video for a upcoming review of a set of really awesome headphones from Odyssey, the LCD-2 closeback headphones. And you'll see that review over at bassgearmag.com. We'll have a link to it here on the video as well. And today I'm joined by Mark Cohen, who's the Chief Sales Officer with Odyssey. And thanks for joining us today, Mark.
Hi.
Tell us a little bit about your position with the company, and also people may be inclined to pronounce this Audeze, but can you please set us straight on the correct pronunciation?
Good question, and thanks for doing this, Tom. Much appreciated. So when Odyssey started, it started typically in a garage, and in that garage was that ubiquitous 2001 Space Odyssey poster. And the original founders of the company thought it would be great to have a name for the company that had something to do with a journey through audio. And in looking at the poster, seeing the word Odyssey, they thought, how can we have a name that's kind of like that? And so they came up with a spelling of A-U-D-E-Z-E for Odyssey, which should be O-D-Y-S-S-E-Y.
Right.
And so maybe they were a little too clever because not everyone knows how to pronounce it correctly, but that is how we got the name that we have today.
I like it. I like it. Cool. How long have you been with the company?
Actually, a little over 8 years. So I joined the company actually just after it became official. So, the original investment in the company is by Warner Music, for example. So, and that's when the company really became, how can I put it, a full-fledged company, and they invited me to join the company at that time.
Awesome, awesome. I'm sure the folks who are familiar with the brand maybe predominantly think of, the use scenarios of, critical listening or listening for enjoyment, or, trying to get a very accurate, engaging reproduction of the sound. And the way that I'm kind of reviewing this, and the way I think many of our readers who are perhaps bass players, many of whom probably do some work in the studio, and of course practicing at home, I'm just curious, when you have people with a use scenario such as playing a musical instrument and trying to hear it, or listening to a mix, whether you're recording it or mastering it, do those use scenarios change how you would design a product, or do you even consider those? Or do you figure, hey, if we make it, accurate, balanced, and engaging, we're going to kind of hit all those players?
Good question. And actually, the answer is more like the last part of your question. And that is, we try to simply make the best possible product we can. And we're not like some companies that say, oh, here's our product for audiophiles, here's our product for pro audio. I mean, something should be accurate for everybody. It doesn't matter, oh, does this sound good for rock music? Does this sound good for classical? Come on, you can't delineate things like that. The music is the music. You have to be true to it at all costs. So we do actually have, though, two different families of tonalities within Odyssey's range. We have the original voicing, which was slightly on the warm side of neutral. So there'd be a slight mid-range dip or recession, and that would be the LCD-2, the original ones. The closeback is different, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. Then the LCD-3, which is a little more neutral than the 2 and has more resolution. Then from there, we sort of branched off into the newer styles of the LCD-X, the MX4, the 4, the 4Z, and those products. And those were designed to be more neutral from the beginning. So if people want something more on the warmer side of neutral, then it's a 3 or a 2. If they want something more neutral, it's the LCD-X. And the reality is that we were sort of dragged into pro audio in the sense that I knew a few people who had done producing and mixing, and they hadn't used headphones before. And one name comes up to my mind immediately is Manny Moroccan. And he had never used headphones for mixing before. And I said, Manny, because I'd known him from a previous life. I said, try these, let me know what you think. And that changed everything for him. And then we started to see people come and listen to all of our models and say, hey, for my work, the LCDX really works well. And there's a little different process, of course, between audiophile listening and the creative listening process or the mixing and mastering process. And that is, you not only want something that is accurate or correctly reflective, maybe a better term to use, but you want something that translates well. Because I used to be on the recording side of things as well. And you'd be frustrated when you mix on what were supposed to be these really great speakers. Right. And then you take that mix, play it back in your car stereo, and you go, what happened to the French horn? Makes well, sense. No one cares about French horns anyway. So sorry, French horn players. But you didn't want that to happen. So I think obviously one of the key words in all this is, how does the product translate? If I hear something and mix something on this, how does it translate to other types of systems? And one of the things we did a couple of years ago is we actually came up with target curves for our headphones, because we found that some people would be like mixing in a hotel room with one of our models, and then they may send that mix to Metropolis Studios in the UK to be mastered, and they're using different headphones. How are we able to reconcile the slightly different tonalities between those two headphones so both sides of the creative process can talk about the same thing in the same way? So we came up with a product called Reveal. And the audiophile world tends to think of these things as being EQ corrections that we publish. But that's really not the point of it. These are actually target curves, which you see in the video world, by the way. You see color spaces in video to make sure that if you produce something with this color space, that red is going to look like that red in the UK, for example. So we did the same sort of thing with our target curves. So if you use our plugin, and it works on all the DAWs and everything else, if you're mixing on our $400 LCD-1s, and you do send that to Metropolis Studios, where Tony Cousins may use an LCD-4, for example, he uses our plugin there. He's going to hear exactly what you did on your LCD-1s the way you heard it.
That's fantastic.
So that's what we've come up with over the years, and that's been very successful for us. But also, we're trying to solve a problem that pros really have. How do I make sure my mix truly represents and translates well to other people?
Man, that's really brilliant. I'm looking forward to digging into that aspect of it a bit more. I haven't tried them with a DAW yet, but I'll have to keep that in mind also.
Now, but getting back to your question, though,
yeah.
One thing that surprised us is when we first started to listen and look to the pro audio market, we thought they'd all want the closed back headphone, our LCD-XC at the time. But because we thought they needed the sound isolation. But they'd come back to us and say, no, we prefer the open back. And also, they're usually in the room by themselves. They're not tracking in a studio. So the open back noise isolation issue is not a problem.
Well, you made the comment earlier that you didn't try to have a product for rock or a product for jazz or different use scenarios. One of the things that was really eye-opening or ear-opening, I guess, for me with the LCD-2 closebacks is that prior to trying them out, I did have some headphones that I knew to be a bit more mid-present. So I'd listen to them for certain things, whether I'm trying to learn a new song or write a part or do a mix. And then I had other headphones that had a better bass response because maybe those ones with the good mid-range didn't go as deep. So I'd switch to those. And purely on the headphone front, the LCD-2 closeback just, had the full range. It was as deep as I wanted anything to be, but it had as much resolution as I could ever hope for. And even more so, it kind of reminded me of, you were talking about being in the studio and mixing, and, it's been a while since I've been in a larger studio, but, you'd have your near field monitors and with some smaller drivers, you'd mix to a certain sound there. You had, the larger, very, powerful full range sounding, monitors. And then you had a set of headphones, at least at the time we were using AKGs or Audio Technicas or whatnot. And, they all had very different sounds. And and also we had like a little boom box, like, okay, someone plays on a boom box, and then you'd bump it to a tape and try it in your car, So we tried all these different things. And of those different monitoring scenarios I had in the past, I actually find listening with the LCD-2 closebacks to be more reminiscent of the very large and very high dollar big monitors that they'd had in the room, because they present this sound that is big, and it's full range and it's powerful, but it doesn't sound like it's right here. I feel like I'm in this room and the sound is out there. And that really kind of, had my jaw on the floor the first time I heard those.
Well, thank you. But you have touched on a couple of different points. What we've done with the closeback LCD-2 and what we do with the X is there's actually sound deadening material between the backside of the driver and the inside of the ear cup. So that helps suck up the back wave of the driver. And that helps it have a larger sound stage than you would normally experience with any other closeback headphone. So that material is very, very important. Also, with the classic closeback, we actually have some EQ filter built in to the driver cup itself. So there is a passive filter there to even out the frequency response, because, as I said earlier, most of the mixers originally said they prefer the LCD-X, the open back version. That's because it was more accurate in the low end. Normally, when you put some kind of cabin around the transducer, it tends to inflate the bass response anywhere between 40 hertz to maybe 150 hertz, depending on all the different design factors. So we got around that by actually putting in a filter in the classic closeback. So when you don't see that with other manufacturers' products. So between that filter and that sound deadening material in the backside of the driver, that solves two of the major problems. That is, how do I still have good bass, but still have something that's not overly booming? Because normally you'd have maybe a 1 to 3B bass shelf between 60 to 150 hertz by closing the back of something. That's a general position, not, everybody's a little different. And then, of course, having that sound deadening material gives you that wider sound stage.
It's very apparent. I was really impressed with that, because my experience had been, as you said, with the difference between open and closed back. The open headphones I tried in the past, tended to have that wider sound stage and really expansive imaging and a bit more detail. And then the closed back, as a bass player, I do want to hear the bass, so I appreciated the fact that they had a bit more content down there. Closer to what I would call balanced, as far as quantity of those. But many of the closeback phones I listened to in the past, things started to get a little less defined, and you lost some of that, detail. So the tricks you guys have pulled with these closeback LCD-2s are fantastic.
Well, thank you. And actually, you can go another step above that to our regular XC model, which is based on the LCD-X. And we just revised both the regular X and the XC last November. And the XC actually got the better end of the deal. The XC actually is even more neutral than almost so many other headphones that are used in pro audio today. And it has an even wider sound stage than the LCD-2 closeback you were just listening to. So it's interesting what's happened. And it's sort of, I listen to the XCs and even the 2 closeback, if I'm listening to, for example, a Marcus Miller track, compared to the open back, that extra bass energy, it's like Marcus is standing next to me playing.
Right.
And one of the advantages we have with the planar magnetic technology, which you've probably realized, is that if you have enough power to drive them correctly, the bass almost has this physical, palpable quality to the bass. It's just not the tune or the pitch, but rather there is some physical quality to the bass response rather than simply headphones on your head.
Right. Right.
You hear it feels more like maybe almost like the speaker situation. And we don't claim that our headphones are a complete replacement for using speakers during mixdown or mastering or whatever, but they are apparently a very, very useful tool as part of your workflow to make sure you're able to sort of have that magnifying glass and dial in on maybe problems that you didn't perceive over the speaker systems.
Well, absolutely. And also, when you're talking, high dollar recording studios, not only does it cost a lot to outfit them, it costs a lot to be sitting in the room with them, so having the headphones you can take with you, especially with your software, curves that you can, make sure you're listening to what you want to be listening to. It gives you a lot more flexibility of where and when and on whose dime you can hear that mix you're trying to listen to.
Yep. And we feel that's very important these days. People, either have to work from home or on the road, or no one has, how can I put it, the opportunities of just going into a regular studio like they used to have in the past.
Right.
Maybe that'll change hopefully in the near future. But for right now, we find the headphones solve a very, very real problem for many people these days.
And while, at least the LCD2s are not a compact headphone, they're rather substantial, though very, very comfortable. Odyssey does offer some high-end in-ear phones also if someone needed to be even more portable, correct?
That's true. As a matter of fact, we do have some engineers that use the i3s or the i4s. And if people haven't seen them or heard them yet, they're quite different in that they're relatively large for an in-ear.
Right.
So it's almost it's over a 20 millimeter diameter planar driver here. And they are not designed to be jammed in your ear canal. So we found many people, and myself, I'm not comfortable having in-ears that are jammed down my ear canal, especially if I've got to work to mix or whatever for hours at a time. It's uncomfortable. The air pressure buildup is kind of crazy. So these are actually designed to sit at the entrance to your ear canal. So you can wear them for long periods of time, yet it still has the bass response that you would think our larger headphones would have. And so we see many people using that, and our reveal target curves include those in-ear i3s and i4s.
Very, very cool. I have to point out, and I'm sure most of our viewers have already seen this, you've got a bass guitar in the background, and
Yes.
You told me that in a former life, you were a bass player. So I'm just kind of curious, does that bring any unique perspective to what you do, or how you approach headphones, or how you think they should be designed?
Yeah, it's one part of the equation. And although I consider myself more of a bass owner than a bass player, I came into bass like maybe some of your viewers did by necessity as opposed to by design. And that is, I start off being a bluegrass musician. And I played banjo. And if you play banjo, then you got to play guitar, you got to play mandolin. And then the bass player left. So I got to be the designated bass player playing upright, not electric.
Nice.
And back then, that was, the bass really was, how can I put it, more of a rhythm instrument as opposed
Right.
to a more musical instrument that you would associate today. So it's like, oh, there's just 1 in 5, and then, oh, wait a minute, coming up, maybe I'll do a 3-note run into the 5. It's like,
Right.
but mostly it was just, keeping the time so the banjo player could play really fast. And then my eyes were open. I was about 15 years old at the time. My eyes were really open when I came across a bass player named Eric White. And he was part of the White family. And that White family was Clarence White, the guitar player, and Roland White, the mandolin player, who were in the Kentucky Colonels band at that time, if any of your viewers are into bluegrass at all. And they lived here in Southern California. And so myself and my other friends in the bluegrass band, we were all taking lessons from them, from Clarence and Roland. And then I saw Eric play bass. And Eric played this slap bass.
Yep.
And not only that, but he had a different concept of playing bass. It wasn't 1 and 5. He would synchronize where he'd do stuff, and he'd solo over these bluegrass tunes, which I'd never heard before. And he just had this really unique concept. And so that's how I learned to, slap upright bass, which, you play upright. So it's different than the electric bass because of the wood and the size and the string spacing and everything. You have a different physical approach and attack and result. Because in an upright bass, if you're slapping, you can get this bump sound,
right? Which
you really don't. That's not something that happens on the electric side of things. So I learned to do that, and but I really still wasn't a bass player. I was still, how can I put it? I was still maintaining the beat, and then later on, I kind of got away from the bass because I was back to playing more banjos and different kinds of guitar and whatever, and different music. And then I went to work for Fender. I was product manager at Fender for 5 years in the 73 to 78. And Freddie Tavares was still there. For those of you who remember Fender history, one of Leo's partners, and he had all this tribal knowledge. And so I learned a lot about bass as well as guitar technology and amplifier technology while I was at Fender. And my first rude awakening is that low E wasn't really 40 hertz.
Right.
Or 41.2. I didn't realize that when you play a Fender bass or jazz bass, the predominant signal coming out of there is the second harmonic, 2 octaves above. It's really 160 hertz. So that's why most people, if they want to hear more bass, they increase the bass level between 120 to 180 hertz. And then they go, oh yeah, that's better bass. But so that kind of shocked me. I didn't realize that bass was more than just 40 hertz. But also at that time, I went to Freddie and I said, who was very, very gracious, by the way, and very knowledgeable. And I said, Freddie, why do you put the thumb rest on the treble side of the strings? Because back then, that thumb rest, that black phenolic bar, was on the treble strings.
Right.
I said, Freddie, everybody's playing with their fingers. And Freddie said, oh, when we started all this and making basses, people were playing with their thumb, and they need a place to anchor their fingers while they played with their thumb. And Freddie was gracious, and everybody else in the R&D department said, but if you tell us people are playing now with their fingers and they need a thumb rest, let's just move the thumb rest to the bass side of the strings. And so we changed it.
Well, thank you for that.
And then I was lucky to meet Jaco. He came in for a day
wow.
and met with him and whatever. So it was fascinating, but also then I learned that instruments sound terrible. And by that, I mean, when you first hear a musical instrument, you hear that tone and you go, that sounds great. But then if you really have to examine it and you start recording with things, you start to realize the natural inharmonicities of the instruments, or if you're or wolf tones. And I didn't realize, for example, jazz basses, the dead spot at C sharp, 6th fret, and of course, once you hear it, you can't unhear it. So, it alerted me to all these things that I really had not realized, I had not been really conscious of. I was just playing and maybe not listening like I should have been. So it was really an eye-opening experience when I spent that time at Fender Musical Instruments. And then I was doing more in recording, and I was always an audiophile. I always enjoyed hi-fi gear. So, and I was listening to all kinds of music. And I realized that the more you listen to different kinds of music, the more it really helped you with maybe the most favorite music you like to play. And while I was at Fender, I was fortunate enough to be able to kind of build whatever I wanted to. So I got back into bass because I went back in the parts bin. I got together a precision body. Then I found a fretless neck. And then I used those, I forgot the name of the string at the time. They weren't tape wound. The string was actually, it went through a tube. They were the covered strings. I forgot what they're called. So they really gave you more of that upright or acoustic bass sound and feel. So I started with that, and I was really, fretless bass kind of like was very interesting to me. So I started playing more of that, and then got distracted. And it wasn't until I ran into Stu Spector at a NAMM show.
Okay.
This is decades ago when he was getting started. And I had Stu make me a match pair of NS2, a 4-string fretted and a 4-string without frets or even fret markers. And I don't know if you've had this experience or some of the other viewers have, but it was like, although it was a little awkward at first getting used to the fact you've got to really pay attention to intonate correctly, it was though it was better to play. It was easier to play. It was like I got rid of those troublesome frets. Those pesky frets were out of the way, and I actually found it kind of liberating and almost easier to play than the fretted product. So I don't know if you'd had that experience as well, and maybe I'm just crazy. But
Oh, no, you're not. Like, well, starting on upright, and it sounded, you did also. I was used to putting my fingers where the note intonates. And then, so when I played a fretted instrument, I kept trying to put my fingers on top of the frets.
Oh, right. Yeah.
You had to learn to play behind the fret. So that I hear what you're saying for sure.
So that was interesting. But of course, growing up with all this, you get to have a better idea of how the instrument should sound. And of course, when you're trying to make reproductive gear, because at the Fender side, you're on the creative, you're in music creation process. On the audiophile side, or what we do, we're in the reproduction process. So you have to understand how the product is supposed to sound to make sure you're able to get that as accurate as possible. Can you get the dynamic range? Do you have that attack? And that's really important especially for a lot of string players, especially bass. You're popping strings on the bass, then you need that initial attack or the impulse response. And dynamic drivers are not as good at that. A planar driver in general, can have better transient response or impulse response than the typical dynamic driver. So if you really pop the strings on the bass, or you really want to hear that initial attack, the planar drivers that we use in our headphones really help give you that sound, that feel as well.
And that was one of my questions as well, is the planar magnetic driver option as opposed to something dynamic. You've touched on a bit, but is that something you use across the board with Odyssey, and what are some of the other benefits of that technology?
So yeah, we use planar magnetic technology exclusively. And for me, this has kind of come full circle, because I was originally shortly after Fostex, I went to another company in the audiophile world. And then I went to work starting up Fostex, making tape recorders and whatever. And at that time, we were the first people to do the planar magnetic headphones, the original Fostex T20s. And so all this time coming back and being at Odyssey, back to planar magnetics, it's kind of like coming back home again. And so the planar magnetic technology back then had some problems because the basic polymer material wasn't that strong. And not only that, but the smog, especially in Southern California back then, could damage the material, so the high frequencies would be rolled off after a period of time.
Wow.
But NASA had developed a new polymer material for the solar sails. And that's when the original founders of this company came across that material. And that material is not just used for solar sails, but also for flexible circuit boards, like for rockets or missiles. Because if you needed a circuit board that went from one wing around the fuselage to the other wing, it had to be flexible, had to be extremely reliable. It couldn't be damaged by vibrations, et cetera. So they took this new material that NASA developed and used that as the basis for our planar magnetic technology. At the same time, over the years, we've taken that to a couple of levels past where it used to be. And we did that with the voice coil design, and also the fact that we now use lasers to do the voice coils. So most people still use the chemical etching process, which is kind of how you make circuit boards. And it's hard to get very fine traces and have them close together that way, because if you look at the chemical etching under a microscope, you'll see it's not a straight line. It looks like it's all these ridges. We call them mouse bites. But the lasers solve that problem. And then we came up with a new type of a magnet structure called fluxor magnets, where if you weren't totally asleep during science class, you found that magnets have a north pole and a south pole, and there's an equal amount of flux density or magnetic power at each end. We actually found a way, how can I put it, conceptually, to take the magnet and fold it around so both the north and south poles were at one side. So you'd have all the flux density on one side of the magnet. So we could make the magnet either the same size but twice as powerful, or half the size and have the same magnetic flux. So that helps make the product more efficient. And then we came up with some other devices as well along the way, like the waveguides that we use. So all these things came about to help develop the product and make it sound as good as it sounds today. However, I would be remiss and not tell you there are a few negatives to planar magnetic technology. Number one, because of the magnets used, and you need a lot of magnets to really get that planar driver to move a lot of air, then it means they're going to be typically heavier. The other problem is that they tend to need a little more power than a regular dynamic headphone. Not all, there's some dynamic headphones that are really power hungry as well. But you can't plug our headphones typically directly into a cell phone jack, for example, or your laptop computer. But they're not so power hungry that they need 500 horsepower to drive them. So any of the typical USB interface boxes, any of the typical headphone jacks on the mixing consoles, they have enough power to drive our headphones.
Gotcha. That's some great technology. I want to drill down a little bit on the LCD-2 closed back, in particular, because that's what I'm focusing my review on. I know there was an original LCD-2, I think around 2008 or so. Just wondering, can you give us a little bit of the history and lineage of this line, this particular line?
All right. So originally, our very first product was the LCD-2, and that original product had wood rings, and the connector jack for the headphone cable was actually machined into the wood ring. So they're easy to find. And that was our first attempt. And they were fairly on the warm side of neutral. But a lot of people loved the sound, and that actually put us on the map. And then from there, we started to become better at making the film. And the film we use is very different. Most people would think our film is extruded, but it's not. Our film is actually cast. So we use a special process and a special type of film for this product. And we became better at being more consistent with the quality and the thicknesses and everything else. So we did have some variation of LCD-2s over the first 2 or 3 years as we sort of found our way and refined the process of the driver. And then we added these phasers, which we call our waveguides, to the LCD-2s. And they became very popular. And we did have some people saying, I kind of wish we could go back to the even warmer sound of the previous version. And so we looked at what we'd done previously and said, okay, we can do that. And that's how we came up with the LCD-2 Classic. And instead of using wood, we use a glass bead-filled or infused polymer instead of the wood rings. So it's less expensive, but it's even more rigid than the wood rings on the regular LCD-2. So we use that for the Classics. And when we came up with a closed back, we actually changed the tuning a bit because we realized that some pros would want to use this product. We want to have a less expensive version of the LCD-X type of product for pro use. So we changed the tuning a little bit. Although the basic driver is the same, but we put that filter in, the passive filter or crossover in, and then we also had that material to soak up the back wave. So we did tune the classic closeback to be more neutral than the LCD-2 Classic. That's a long explanation. I hope I didn't lose anybody during that.
No. So I guess I should point out, right? These are the LCD-2 Classic closeback.
Yeah. We get paid by the word.
Exactly. Well, I have to say that they are fantastic, and encourage people to read my review. One of the things that I noticed that may not, seem as technical to the headphones themselves is the cable that you guys use. I've been at NAMM shows and auditioned lots of different high-end stuff, and sometimes I'll hear a set of headphones that sound fantastic until I start like shifting and moving around a little bit, and I notice that the cable is either very microphonic, or I'm hearing all the noise of it moving across my shirt or even my hands is just translated to my ears, and it drives me crazy. And I don't really get that with your cable. Do you guys do anything in particular to mitigate those issues?
So without sounding too nasty, it's really because some other people just really treat the cable as an accessory that comes in the box. Whereas we look at the cable as part of the whole equation of the sound. And so, it's what do you do for the insulation? What do you do for the dielectric? How are they twisted? That sort of thing. And all those help reduce any microphonic or general cable noise. So there are known ways to deal with all these things. It's just a matter of, do you want to spend the money and do you want to take the time?
Gotcha.
I would love to say there's some special secret sauce, but it's not rocket science. It's just engineering 102.
And paying attention to the details and realizing that as good as your headphones are, the sound travels to them through those cables. So they have to be up to the task also. Well, man, this has been a great bit of information and some pretty impressive, even base specific name dropping that I did not expect. So thank you for that. I have to ask you though, just because I'm getting to be a bit fired up listening to music myself with these new Odyssey phones. When you yourself want to sit back and just really listen to music for the sheer joy of listening to it, what's your go-to source material? Is it back to the bluegrass, or do you have some other things you really enjoy?
I'd say after all this time, I just like listening to music that has some kind of an emotional connection. So whatever, I just listen to that, and it could be anything. It could be flamenco music. It might be bluegrass. It might be fusion. It could be anything. Right now, if you ask me what I have, I'm probably listening to a CD of Al Di Meola. I think it's Elysium, where he's overdubbing all these guitar parts.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've heard those tracks, but it's kind of amazing how he makes it all work. It all sounds completely integrated, but it's all separately done. And he has this, he's pretty good at getting the emotion across. So I'd say I'm listening to that right now. For my
Excellent.
own personal listening on headphones, I probably tend to listen more to the XCs. And the main reason for that is that even though I know on an intellectual level, they are not quite as ultimately accurate as our LCD4s, for example, I like the fact there's a little bit of bass lift. So Marcus Miller is standing next to me, mm-hmm. but also the sound isolation.
Right.
So I'm always interacting with people and the outside world all day long. So to be able to have the closed back headphone on, it helps me focus on the music better.
It makes sense. And as I mentioned before, you're getting that isolation in the sense that you are not having the room around you impact your listening experience, but you're also not limiting your listening experience to just right here, and your brain translates and you're hearing, this huge sound stage even though your drivers are actually relatively close to your ears, and that's a fantastic feat to pull off, really.
Well, thank you. Much appreciated.
Well, again, thank you for your time. And if folks want to learn more about the LCD-2 Classic closebacks, check out bassgearmag.com. We'll have that on there very soon. And I really encourage people to check out any Odyssey products you can get your ears around, because this has really been an amazing experience for me to try this out.
Oh, Tom, thank you very much. Really appreciate this opportunity.
All right. Thanks again, Mark.
Ciao.